The Columbian Editorial Board is pleased to welcome candidates for United States Senator from the state of Washington. I'm Greg Jane. I'm the editorial page editor at the Columbian, and I'll let the editorial board members introduce themselves. Craig?
I am Craig Brown. I'm the editor of the Columbian and a member of the editorial board.
Hello, I'm Colleen Keller. I'm the assistant news editor of the Columbian and a member of the editorial board.
We also have a reporter sitting in on this meeting. She won't be asking questions here, but may want to speak with you later and might be writing a story about this. As mentioned, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel. And I should mention ahead of time, we do have a bit of a time constraint, so I apologize in advance if I need to cut somebody off to keep things moving. Let's see. So that said, we got all the housekeeping out of the way. Please take 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourself, explain why you are running, and then we will move on to specific policy questions. And we'll start with Tiffany.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me on here. I am Tiffany Smiley, born and raised in Washington State, and I am standing up and fighting for all of Washington, to be a voice for Washington State, because Senator Murray only works for Washington, D.C. At 23 years old, I walked into my husband's trauma care unit at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I'd resigned from my nursing job here in Washington State, and I didn't know if I was going to greet him dead or alive, but I was going to be there. And when I walked in, he had tubes coming out of every orifice of his body. He was in a coma. And one thing was certain, the suicide bomber that he was negotiating with in service to our country had detonated his car. The shrapnel from that car obliterated both of Scotty's eyes. Thank goodness I was a nurse. I helped save Scotty's life. I took on the Army. I believed in this wild idea that my husband, despite his disabilities, or maybe because of, he could go on and serve and be an asset to our country and to the Army. So I took on the DOD, I took on the Army. I built a coalition who believed in that vision as well. And my husband went on and became the first blind active duty officer to ever serve our country. After that, I went on and I fought for real meaningful reform within the VA, because our family certainly understood the roadblocks that DC puts up in front of hardworking families and veterans, red tape, roadblocks that deter the help that they earned. So I took on the VA and we won. That's exactly the same spirit and what I learned from those experiences that I will take to Washington, D.C., because Washington State needs a voice. We have real crisis at every turn here in Washington State. So I will be that voice for all of Washington State. I have a track record of taking on big government and winning, and that's exactly what I'll do when I get to Washington, D.C.
Great, thank you. And Patty?
Greg, thank you so much to you and the members of your Ed board for having this to us today, and I appreciate your consideration for endorsement. Look, I'm running because of the same reason I always have. I get up every day and I think about every part of our state and what we need to make sure that we are improving lives for our families, that I bring our voices and our values and our needs to Washington, D.C. to fight for our communities. I've been proud to be representing Southwest Washington and working on so many issues to help out the community, everything from the Vancouver waterfront park that we worked on many years ago, so excited to see where it is now, to the now IBR, working to make sure that we have the resources there when we get that done, to helping with places like Family Solutions who need help and resources from DC to provide resources for our kids who are suffering from mental health. But I will tell you this, I think this is such a critical election because we really will determine for our state who our voice is going to be, what our values are, and what we will fight for. Women's rights are on the line in this election. Our democracy is on the line in this election. How we're going to make sure we improve the economy and help families stay safe and get through the pandemic we've been through and back on our feet across the board. And I will work every day to make sure that our state has a strong voice in Washington, D.C., and do as I always have, come home and talk to communities, find out what their priorities are, and work to make sure that we are making those investments and keeping those priorities. So I've been proud to represent Southwest Washington. I look forward to keeping that voice strong in Washington, D.C. for the next 6 years.
Great, thank you. And thanks again to both of you for joining us. Obviously, a pressing issue is the economy and inflation. What steps are we on the right path, and what steps can Congress take to address that? And we'll start with Patty.
Well, thank you. And obviously that is a critical issue. Let's remember how we got to where we are. We had a global pandemic, and inflation is a global problem. So we have been very focused in Washington, D.C. to focus on all the issues caused by the supply chain shutdown that we have seen. We passed the infrastructure bill that is now a decades-long investment in our roads, our bridges, our highways, our ports to get our economy moving again. That obviously does not happen overnight. But the issue we're seeing of inflation in our economy really is an issue of supply. It's a housing supply. It's goods on our shelves in the stores. It is an energy shortage supply, and it is families and workers having the right skills they need. So we really need to look at all parts of that. And again, the infrastructure bill was a good start on that. The chips and a science bill that we passed that means we're going to be manufacturing those chips right here at home instead of relying on foreign countries. Having American manufacturing jobs is part of that. Housing is a huge part of that, making sure we're doing our part at the federal level to support communities with the housing needs they need, and absolutely focused on lowering costs for families. That's exactly why we passed the Inflation Reduction Act to lower energy costs for families and to lower healthcare costs and prescription drug costs as we work our way through this global crisis that we're in.
Great, thank you. And just to clarify, did you support the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, and the Inflation Reduction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Help write them and absolutely support them.
Okay. Tiffany, your thoughts on the economy and inflation?
Yes, unfortunately, the quality of life of all Washingtonians is suffering under this current administration. What I can do when I get into the Senate is I will rein in the out of control spending that has caused this inflation. You know, take it from Larry Summers, and Democrat economist who warned that the American Rescue Plan was going to cause the greatest inflation that we would see in a generation. And that indeed it has. We have some of the highest grocery prices here in Washington state, some of the highest gas prices. Our families are suffering. They need someone who will fight for Washington state. And unlike my opponent who only works for Washington, D.C., this contrast could not be clearer. I will permanently extend the 2017 tax cuts for the middle class. The middle class needs relief and needs it now. Rein in the out of control spending. And I certainly will make sure that the 87,000 IRS agents do not come after our hard working Washingtonians, our small business owners, and Washington families. You know, Senator Murray stood by Joe Biden with the American Rescue Plan and said, we are in a better place now. I have been in all 39 counties across Washington state, many of them multiple times. Every room I ask, are you any better off? They say, no, we're worse. You know, $1 billion of the American Rescue Plan went to criminals like Larry Nassar and the Boston bomber. And when we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, despite its deceiving name, the Inflation Reduction Act actually will do nothing to reduce inflation, actually raises taxes for all Americans. And that's coming from the CBO. That's not coming from me. And also I think it's important that Washington voters know in the Inflation Reduction Act that Senator Murray was the deciding vote for an excise tax on natural gas. So going into winter, Washington families, you are going to see your energy prices increase. That's what's on the ballot this November. I will fight and be a voice for hardworking Washington families to rein in the out of control spending, get our inflation under control, and lower energy prices.
So would you have voted for the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act?
The Inflation Reduction Act actually, like I said, does nothing to reduce inflation. The infrastructure bill, I am all for that. Washington state needs good infrastructure. There are some problems around that as far as workforce and actually getting people to be able to carry out the infrastructure, but I would be all about the infrastructure bill, yes.
And what about the CHIPS Act?
And the CHIPS Act is very good. Look, we need to increase our supply chain and get people back to work.
Okay, Craig?
Sure. Tiffany, you mentioned a minute ago about lowering costs for natural gas and petroleum products. Are you concerned about global warming? Is that a hoax or is that a reality? And how would reducing the cost of fossil fuels help the global warming problem?
Yeah, I mean, the environment is important. I'm a farm girl. I mean, farmers, I was raised to protect and take care of our earth and this environment, and we have real issues that need addressed. That's why I'm honored to be endorsed by the ACC, the American Conservation Coalition, a young group of up and coming leaders who understand that we need to protect our environment. But look, people are suffering under Joe Biden and Patty Murray's policy. When we talk about inflation, we can start to offset those costs by becoming energy independent. I think it's important to note that Senator Murray shut down our energy independence. She gave it to enemy countries that hate us. And last time I checked, Russia doesn't have any environmental standards at all, and they commit human rights violations. So what I propose is becoming energy independent. What we can do is two-pronged. We can expand natural gas and oil in the short term to lower costs for Washington families at the gas pump and your energy bills, while we at the same time expand clean energy, reduce gas nuclear, or increase nuclear, wind, and solar with an all of above diversified approach. We cannot keep hardworking families suffering any longer. I guess the question is, how long do we have to wait?
Thank you. What's your response, Patty?
Setting that aside, we have to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Climate change is an incredible challenge that we face. We see it everywhere. We see it in the droughts that are making our farmers see fewer crops. We see it in our forest fires that we endure every year. We're still feeling the effects of smoke from fires in much of the Washington state today because of that. We are seeing industries like our shellfish industry really have a huge impact from this. The health impacts are incredible. More asthma, more kids with chronic illnesses. We have to do everything we can do to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and address climate change. I was very proud that this, just before, I guess the first part of August, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest investment in climate change ever. It will reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. It will move us to a clean energy economy. It will lower costs for families, and it will create jobs, because we are investing in making sure that people here in our country create those new technologies, those new energies, that we can export those globally. What we did was provide tax incentives for families so they could move off fossil fuels. For example, making sure that they can have solar panels or heat pumps, doing everything we can to help businesses invest in clean energy, making sure that we do the right things to move into the future. One of the things that I was extremely proud of working on this time, seems small in the long run, but it's big in the long run, was in the infrastructure bill. I included a provision that moves us to electric school buses instead of fossil fuel, gas fueled buses. Why is that important? Because most of our school buses run in lower income communities. They produce a lot of exhaust, and it impacts the health of our kids. So it's a grant program, which all of you know in Vancouver, we have already begun to start doing this, to convert to electric school buses. That will make a difference in the long run. So yes, we have to do everything we can to move to a clean energy economy. And I'm proud that we had the biggest investment ever in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I will add, that was fully paid for. And I think that often gets lost in this. And in that, we also reduced the deficit by $300 billion. So it was a major investment, fully paid for, that addressed climate change, it addressed our energy crisis, and by the way, also lowered costs for prescription drugs.
Craig, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay, Colleen?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Senator Lindsey Graham has proposed a national abortion ban that would outlaw abortions after 15 weeks. I would like to know where both of you stand on that. And Patty, if we could start with you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was stunned, not surprised, but stunned when the Supreme Court took away a woman's right to make her own healthcare choices. She gets to decide with her own family, with her own doctor, according to her own faith and her own needs. That was stripped away by the Supreme Court. And today we are seeing chaos across our country where states are enacting extreme bans on abortion. I would never support a ban on abortion. I always believe politicians should not be making these decisions. Families and their doctors with their own faith should be making them. We are seeing the chaos that's been created by that here in our own state, where we have providers in Spokane who live in Idaho are worried that if they come to Spokane to do their job, they'll be arrested when they go home to Idaho. I've been working on the Senate floor to try and make sure that people can travel to states where abortion is legal today, and that Republicans blocked that. I've been trying to make sure that women have support they need to be able to get contraceptive care, to be able to get the kind of care they need, and that doctors can't be criminally charged. That's been blocked by Republicans in the Senate. So this is a very broad issue. I believe we should reinstate Roe at the federal level. I have legislation to do that. And in the meantime, I'm working every way I can to make sure that women, not politicians, decide what a woman should do when she's pregnant.
All right, and Tiffany?
Yes, thank you. This is an important issue, of course, and I believe there are good people on both sides of the issue. I have been very clear from the beginning, even before the unprecedented Supreme Court leak, that I oppose a federal abortion ban. The Supreme Court gave it back to the people. And Washington State long decided where they stand on the issue. You know, I wish career politicians would stop using these issues as wedges, as political wedges, and fear-mongering and scaring people. Nothing changes for women here in Washington State. I respect the will of the voters of Washington State. If there is one extreme in this issue, it is my opponent, because if she had it her way, she would change Washington State law and the will of the people. It would be taxpayer funded abortion on demand all the way up to the point of birth. And I think the question we should ask my opponent is, does she believe in any legal limitations to abortion? I stand with the majority of Americans. What I will do as Washington State's next senator is ensure that women have timely, affordable access to contraception, that they have access to health care, to child care. I will go get that done. So when a woman is in a point of crisis, that she has every resource in front of her that she needs to make the best decision, and that she knows here in Washington State that if you choose to keep your child, that it is not a ticket to poverty or a ticket to a lack of education.
So just to clarify, you would not support Senator Graham's proposal?
That's correct. I would not.
And Patty, I want to follow up on what Tiffany said. Do you support any restrictions on abortion?
I supported the decision of Roe, which is what my legislation is at the federal level, to make sure that women make their own healthcare decisions under the Roe decision, to make sure that women and their doctors make those decisions. You know, this is not a hard issue for me. I'm not a doctor, and I'm certainly not in that woman's home. And they should make those decisions, not me. There are people who make a decision either way, but it is not my job as a politician. What the Supreme Court did was it turned that decision over to politicians, and I object to that.
But so you would favor a federal law rather than leaving it up to the individual states?
I believe we need a federal law that is the Roe decision enacted at the federal legislative level, so that women in Texas or Idaho or a number of other states, now at 27, I believe, aren't victims of a politician's decision in their own family and in their own home. You know, this is a fundamental right for women as American citizens.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, how should Congress address immigration and border security? And Tiffany.
Yes, thank you. You know, again, you see this every election cycle. Career politicians use immigration reform as a wedge to divide and conquer, and then they fail to get anything done on it. Right now, we have an open, porous border. My opponent is for an open border. It's hurting the immigrant, and it's hurting us right here in Washington state. We know that there is enough fentanyl coming across our southern border to overdose every American 4 times over. It's here in Washington state, and it's not just on our streets or in our homeless encampments. It's in our schools. I just learned of another young boy who was killed by fentanyl in Eastern Washington. I learned of a young boy in Puyallup who took one little pill just one time. He wasn't an addict. He was a 4.0 student. He was a basketball player, and he took one little pill and he's dead. So I don't think my opponent's ever been to the southern border, but I went down there because I know how important this is to Washington families. I went down there to see it with my own eyes. And when I was on the border, I saw the cartel towers. I saw how easy it was to get drugs into the United States of America. I met with law enforcement down there, and what they told me, they said, I'm so glad there's fresh faces. There's new people getting into Congress, because he said, my greatest roadblock to saving lives, protecting immigrants, and stopping drugs from coming into the United States and killing Americans is Washington, D.C. He goes, please go back and get everything done that you can. So before we talk about immigration, we have got to secure our border through technology, manpower, make sure that our border agents have every resource that they need to protect our border. We need to shut down the billion-dollar cartel operation that is going on. And that's something I can get to work on right away. I do believe we need comprehensive immigration reform. Yes.
So we do have border security, and how much do we spend on border security?
I would have to go back and look it up, but I know, talking to the border security agents, they are telling me they need more help. In fact, they're doing
okay, but my question is, how does that translate into open borders? Doesn't sound to me like it's
completely open, because they don't have resource. We don't have a strong immigration policy. We aren't holding the cartel accountable. We're not letting sheriffs and local law enforcement, when they go into a stash house, they're not allowed to swab all of the other members in that house. So we cannot follow up on criminals and keep track of them. This is a multifaceted issue, but it is clear. I went down to the border. I saw it with my own eyes. We have a completely open border.
Okay, thank you. Senator Murray?
Well, I believe your question was how we need to fix our immigration system, correct?
And border security.
Very good. So we have an immigration system today that doesn't work for anyone. It doesn't work for our farmers and our growers who do not have a supply of workers to be able to pick our crops in central or northwest Washington. Our companies that are looking for great talent can't recruit from other companies to help with our high-tech industry. We have families who are separated, who are suffering, and we need to have strong immigration reform, which includes a pathway to citizenship for those who are here, that they work their way to citizenship and pay fines, but have an ability to become citizens. We rely on those as a workforce in many of our service sectors, and today it is a challenge that needs to be fixed. So that has to be part of it. We also need to invest in our courts and our custom and immigration services themselves for people who are coming here to seek asylum. And we have always been a country who welcomes people who've been victims of brutal rape or murder of their families to be able to come here and seek asylum. But it takes too long right now for them to get through the system. So we do need increased funding for our courts and our custom systems so we can get those people through. Now, remember, a lot of people are returned right away. But if they do have a legitimate reason, we need to make sure they get through that system quickly. And of course, we need to make sure that we have the services here for those who do come to seek it, the ability to be able to stay here and are supported. Yes, we do need to make sure we have strong support for our border through our customs and border officials. It is something I do all the time as a member of the Appropriations Committee, working to provide those resources and training. We need to recruit good people, and we need to make sure they can stay on the job. So yes, and we need to remember we have more than one border, and we also have to protect our northern border, which we've been very focused on to make sure that we have the support there for many amazing customs agents and people who secure our northern border as well.
Now, and you say we have a immigration system that doesn't work for anybody. It seems like we've been saying that for quite some time. Why hasn't it been fixed?
Yeah. I am so frustrated by that. And we were very close to it. I think it was like 10 years ago. We got a bill passed out of the Senate, and the House that was controlled by the Republicans at that time didn't take it up. That was the closest we have been. And since then, it has become such a partisan issue, using the border as a wedge against people who, we are a country that has welcomed immigrants for a long time. So I'm hopeful that at some point everybody can back off, recognize that yes, we need secure border, but we also have to have an immigration that works, a system that works. It's important for our economy. It's important for our jobs. It's important for humanitarian reasons.
And just to clarify now, Tiffany, you mentioned that, yeah, the system needs to be fixed. You are not in favor of completely closing the borders?
No,
or should
we obviously need to secure our border. They need technology, they need resources that protects the immigrant, because I saw with my own eyes too, dozens of people lined up on the Mexico border with wristbands where they're risking their life and paying cartel members to come over. There should be a pathway that makes sense and that is safe, and stay and seek asylum in your country. There needs to be more immigration lawyers. But look, at the end of the day, we know through that open porous border that fentanyl is coming through. It is coming through. It's here. It's killing our kids. I'm talking to the mother in Kent sitting in her living room who has been affected by this. It is here. It's killing our kids. And when I was meeting with the homeless down in the Soto encampment, that's exactly what they told me. They said everything changed when fentanyl came on our streets. So we have got to stop the flow of fentanyl from coming into our country.
Okay. Craig?
Sure. So I think a lot of people think of Congress as a place full of mean people with entrenched positions that can't get a darn thing done. So is that stereotype true? And if so, what would you do to try to change that? Senator Murray?
Well, thank you for asking that, because as you know, some of the things that I have accomplished, I have been most proud of to work with my Republican counterparts. And in the Senate, obviously, you have to work with both Republicans and Democrats to get that done. I remember when government shut down, no one thought we could get it open again. And Paul Ryan and I wrote the budget agreement that reopened our country, got people back to work, and got us out of a budget stalemate. We did that by sitting down, listening to each other, agreeing from the start that we would not go out of those meetings and tell everybody what the other person said, but respecting each other. And I've always tried to do that. When everybody was complaining about No Child Left Behind, I went to Lamar Alexander. He was chair of our committee at that time. I was the ranking Democrat. And I said, I want to work with you on this. This is a challenge we need to work with on. He respected me for that. We sat down, we worked that through, and rewrote the No Child Left Behind law that is now in effect today to make sure we're doing the resources in the right way, reducing the amount of testing, and really relying on the federal government to do its part in a structurally good way. I'm very proud of that work. Today, as a matter of fact, I am working with Senator Burr. I'm the chair of the HELP committee. He is my counterpart on a prevent pandemics bill. I will tell you, as someone who's gone through all we have gone through in this country, talking to so many communities, schools, our healthcare system, we had a pandemic, but we also had a crisis because we were not prepared for it. So Senator Burr and I sat down and we looked at everything that went wrong from the beginning of this pandemic, to the CDC not having the technology to know where they needed to send, whether it was tests or whether it was ventilators, to the communication crisis that we had, to the public health system that wasn't working. And we put together a package called Prevent Pandemics. I've now passed it out of my committee with bipartisan support. We expect that to get signed into law by the end of this year. But I do that all the time. I find members that I can work with on both sides. We address a problem, we figure out a solution, and I go to work and get it done. And I'm proud of that work.
Thank you. Tiffany, do you agree with that? And what's your perspective on how Congress functions?
Yes, well, I think I stand with the majority of Americans who believe that it's broken and they fail to deliver results on a continual basis. You know, I think what we're facing are career politicians who work for Washington, D.C. You know, Senator Murray has been there for almost 30 years, and she, you know, has a nice laundry list of ideas and bills. But if they really worked, why is our quality of life here in Washington state so bad? Why are there so many homeless who are living on the streets, addicted to drugs, poisoning themselves every day? Why do we have the highest level of crime that we have seen in 30 years? We're about to, the homicide rate is about almost to exceed 2021. Overdose deaths are tripling. Our education system is plummeting. Test scores are down considerably at shocking levels. We should all be alarmed about the education of our children. Childhood anxiety is up. Suicide rates are up. If all of this was working, why is it not working for Washington state? Maybe that works for Washington, D.C., and it sounds good at the cocktail parties, but it is not working for us here. You know, I have a track record of taking on big government, of building coalitions, of working with anyone. I know my opponent likes to paint me as a threat to democracy for meeting with Donald Trump on behalf of every Democrat, Republican, and independent service member and their family. That's who I am. I will meet with anyone to get the job done and deliver results. And I can tell you, being in all 39 counties, listening to thousands of voters across Washington state, I am committed to political recovery and reform for Washington state. I have committed to 10 town halls a year. I think that is so important that we listen to the state and we listen to the voters. And not only that, if Congress cannot balance a budget, I'm not going there to get a paycheck. If they can't balance a budget, then they shouldn't get paid, because hardworking Washington families are sitting at the table every single day trying to figure out how to make ends meet. With rising cost of groceries and rising gas prices, they're having to decide, do I buy a gallon of milk or do I put a gallon of gas in my car? And it doesn't have to be that way.
Now, a couple of things. You mentioned some of the things that are not going well. Do you think the pandemic played a role in those?
Sure, the pandemic played a role, but there was no reason why our kids should have been shuttered out of school for over a year and a half. You know, Senator Murray was a proponent of lockdowns, mandates, the government picking winners and losers. We should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Okay, Patty, you want to respond to that?
Stayed in session then, so you wouldn't have shut down schools during the pandemic. Is that what you said?
Well, there came a point where we knew the science showed, you know, that it was safe for kids to go back. If anything, we needed to give parents a choice and offer both. You could have chosen virtual or in person.
But that wasn't Senator Murray's decision. That was the state government.
He was a proponent of shutdowns and lockdowns. In
No,
fact,
no.
Opportunity on the Senate floor.
Patty, you want to respond to that?
Well, I'm not sure which shot I should take a response at, but let me go with the schools, because when the pandemic hit, I don't think any of us will forget that moment. I certainly didn't. I have family that lives very close to the nursing home that we first saw in the pandemic, with the number of deaths and people panicked. And I had family very close by to that who were seeing innumerable kids at school. Their school, not the federal government, decided to shut down because they didn't even have enough teachers at school who were sick. People were worried about what was going on. Well, it was at that point, under the Trump administration, we started working to make sure that we had the resources available to help our communities get the information they need, working on producing a vaccine, all of the things we've seen. I won't go back through it, but let me talk about schools in particular. In the American Rescue Plan that not one Republican voted for, I wrote the provisions to make sure that our schools had the resources to open again. Those decisions to close were at the local level. I used to be a school board member. Those decisions were at the local school board member with the public health community in those local communities. But I wrote the provision in the American Rescue Plan to help our schools get the resources to get back open again, whether it was ventilation or masks or tests, making sure they had those resources. And in addition, providing money for our schools to help our kids catch up. I was so worried because having kids at home that long was really detrimental to their ability. Some kids did really well with tech. A lot of kids did not. And our schools needed help with summer programs, tutoring programs, making sure we have after-school programs. Those funds were in the American Rescue Plan that my opponent keeps talking about she wouldn't support. Those funds not only helped our schools reopen, and all of them are back open today, but also have the resources they are now using to help their kids catch back up. And of course, we need to do more. We need to continue to support them. But I fight for public education every day on the appropriations bill. It's one of my top priorities, and I will continue to do that.
Okay, I want to go back for just a second. Tiffany, something you touched on. You said your opponent is trying to paint you as a threat to democracy. Who legitimately won the 2020 presidential election?
Yes, I have answered this question so many times, and on the record and on national TV. And it breaks my heart because, there's real people suffering with quality of life.
Are you going to answer the question?
Yes, Joe Biden is our president. I have answered so many times.
Did he legitimately win?
Yes, he did legitimately win.
Okay, then the follow-up question, do you believe that the January 6th attack on the Capitol was legitimate political discourse?
Look, yeah, our family watched in total disbelief on January 6th, right? Mm-hmm. I think the world did. It's a dark stain on our country that will take generations to rebuild. And anyone who broke the law should be held to the full extent of the law. But look,
okay, thanks. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, and I am on the record many times in print and on video, and it just breaks my heart because we have to be able as a country to unify and move forward. There are real issues. I'm talking to parents who were driving around on almost $6 a gallon of gas looking for baby formula to feed their children. They were not worried about January 6th.
Okay. Colleen?
Tiffany, you keep mentioning, criticizing career politicians. Are you saying then that if you should be elected to the U.S. Senate, you would term limit yourself?
That is correct. One of the first things I did on my campaign was sign a term limits pledge. I think 2 terms would be great. I believe I could get a lot of work done within 12 years. That's what I will be committed to. And I think it's important across the board. Like I mentioned, my agenda for political recovery and reform. The American people are losing faith in our Congress, one of the lowest approval ratings, and rightfully so, because we need to be able to deliver results, roll up our sleeves, and actually deliver, stop paying lip service to special interests and focusing on just re-elections and job security. We need to actually deliver results.
Okay, and then I have a second question regarding, you have been making IRS a campaign issue. It's on, you mentioned it again in your opening statement, it's in your TV ads, etc. According to the Treasury Secretary in April, he said there's about $600 billion in uncollected taxes just over the past year or so alone. In addition, IRS is anticipating a loss of 50,000 people over in the next 5 years or so. and it hasn't been able to hire anybody for 10 years. So what is wrong with the IRS getting some money to replenish its workforce so it can collect all those taxes?
Well, last I checked, 87,000 IRS agents don't change the weather. So I think we need, to focus on the fact that we shouldn't be going and attacking any Americans right now, especially heading into a recession. And it is.
How is that attack? Again, I'm sorry, I just don't quite follow what that means.
A hiring of 87,000 IRS agents. When I look across the board, we have a doctor shortage, we have a nursing shortage. There's many other areas that I think need to be triaged as an important. So it is scary for Americans who are trying to make ends meet when you see in the Inflation Reduction Act, 87,000 IRS agents. When small businesses are trying to rebuild, to come back, when hardworking Washington families are trying to come back, and now there's a threat of more IRS agents coming after you for your money, like you said, to collect their money.
Well, according to the General Accountability Office, the ones who haven't been getting audited are the super rich. Those, in fact, are the audits that have fallen way behind. So is that
PolitiFact this, but those making $25,000 are 5 times more likely to be audited by the IRS. I will stand up for them.
So, Senator Murray, do you have thoughts on the IRS?
There is no army of IRS agents. The fact is that a lot of people I have talked to sent their tax receipts back in and were waiting for their tax return, did not get it for months because we don't have enough people to process people's IRS statements right now. So part of what we were trying to do was rebuild that. But the other part you alluded to is that people who have very complex tax returns are very difficult to audit. We have a lot of people who are retiring out of the IRS. We need to replace them, and we need to make sure they have the skills to be able to go through those very difficult, challenging IRS statements so that those people pay their fair share.
Thank you. That was all I had. Great. Thanks.
Okay. Tiffany, on your website, you favor permanently extending the cap on state and local tax deductions to quote, prevent the rich in high tax states like California from lowering their tax bills. Doesn't that also apply to Washington residents?
Yeah, but not as much in the sense of we don't have an income tax. So, we got to look at, we need to be able to find ways to give a break to the middle class, especially, like I said, with the rising cost of living. So we need to rein in that out of control spending. We need to ensure that we are energy dependent to lower the cost of gas, lower the cost of energy prices for Washington families. So that's what I was referring to in that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification. So a quick question. Tiffany, you talked about entrenched politicians and that things aren't going well. What is something that President Biden has done or has supported that you agree with?
Well, look, I mean, that's hard to say right now when you look at our national security, when you look at crisis after crisis. Perhaps, maybe one thing honestly, when I'm talking to families all over Washington state, I'm trying to come up with something we agree on, me and President Biden, but I think it's clear that we have demonstrated weakness on a global stage, which is causing great national security concerns. It's causing food prices to go up. It's causing gasoline prices to go up. I mean, should we call this president a wartime president? I mean, that is the path we're heading down. It's very scary. That's why this election is so important.
But you can't think of anything he's done that you agree with, that you would support.
I mean, at this point, no, unless you have a specific item.
Okay. Patty, what is something the president has done that you disagree with?
Well, I go to work every day and say, what is right for Washington state? And I fight for my state first, no matter who's president. I've always done that. President Biden's budget did not fully fund what we needed for Hanford nuclear cleanup. I went to bat immediately. I went after the Department of Energy. I called every member of the administration and the president himself, and I said, that won't work for our state. We have a nuclear reservation here. We have got to clean up. It's a federal obligation. It's a legal and a moral obligation, and you need to fix this. And they did. They came back and redid the budget so that we have the resources we need in this year's budget. There's been other times I have disagreed with the president. He was a colleague of mine in the Senate. We didn't always agree on everything. I voted against the Iraq war. He voted for it. But I always come home and say, what does my state need, and go to bat for that first, no matter who is the president.
Okay. And now why don't you give us your final pitch, why voters should support you, and we'll leave it at that. We'll start with Tiffany.
Yes, thank you. Like I mentioned, I've been in all 39 counties listening to you and hearing your concerns. And it couldn't be more clear that we need a new direction in Washington State. We need leadership. We need country over party, service over self, someone who's willing to go to DC and take on the big government and deliver results. My opponent is spending millions and millions of dollars in attack ads to try to paint me and my family as a threat to democracy, when we have courageously stood up for everyone in this great country. I will stand up for you. And, the millions of dollars of attack ads, this race isn't about me. This race isn't even about Patty Murray. This is about you. This is about your family, your children, your jobs, your future, and this great state. So I encourage you to go to smileyforwashington.com. On there, you will see my agenda for recovery and reform, how we can turn crisis into hope for all of Washington. So I ask you to join me. Together, we will get Washington State on the right track, deliver results, and improve the quality of life for all Washingtonians.
Great, thank you. Patty, give us your final pitch.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you for all of you for doing this today, and thank you for listening. And look, I am so been given such an honor to represent the people in Washington State, every single corner of our state, and to go to work every single day to bring our values and our priorities to DC to fight for our investments, to make sure that every corner of the state has what it needs to grow, and use my seat on the Appropriations Committee to do that, to use my seat on the Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee to make sure we're doing the right policies and investments, whether it's lowering your prescription drug costs or lowering your energy costs, fighting climate change, making sure our transportation infrastructure is up to par so we can get to work and get to where our families are quicker and better. And I want to continue to do that because I think there's a lot more work we need to do. I'm excited about my child care proposal. Every single business, every single family knows that the barrier to people going back to work and being productive is child care. I'm fighting hard for my child care proposal and for family leave. If we learned one thing in this pandemic, if you don't have the ability to stay home and take care of your family when you need to, you can't be productive at work. So I'm going to continue to fight for our families, for our quality of life, for the great environment we have. And I look forward to serving you again for the next 6 years.
Great. Well, thank you very much to both of you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Best of luck.
Really
Thank you.